Is our government in the possession of a crash retrieval that was made not on planet Earth?
We have a pretty good idea where those things were taken. It's not a secret anymore that those things have been retrieved. They've been retrieved all over the world by special teams. They've been taken to the best labs.
The Ukrainian researchers said, we see these UAP under all kinds of visible conditions, a lot of the time in lots of different locations.
We also have the Webb telescope that can look at such an object from a different direction than the observatories on Earth.
The myths are consistent with oftentimes referred to as the gods.
And there's a lot more going on here, not just on this planet, but on other planets.
I think this is the Ark of the Covenant.
There were actually multiple arks.
History isn't what we've been taught, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to this session this evening. I'm glad you could all come. My name is Bob Dean, and I've been living in Tucson now off and on since 1959. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, committed UFO researcher. Many of you may have read about me recently. I'm the maverick who sued my boss, the sheriff of Pima County, and won, where he denied me a promotion because of my interest in UFOs. And I took him to court, and after 2 years of a lawsuit, I finally prevailed. But I just got back from a 6-week tour in Europe, building and putting together an international network on UFO research. And I've been spending some time with some of the top researchers in the world. And at some point, I'd like to be able to share some of that information with you. But tonight, I'm here simply to kick off the festivities and introduce you to a couple of very special people. And I think that the presentation tonight from Randy Winters is going to be one you will thoroughly enjoy. Whether you've heard of the Billy Meier case, whether you're familiar with what's been going on in Switzerland or not, you're going to find that what you're going to learn tonight is going to be something that you won't be able to easily forget. At this point, I would like to introduce you to a very good friend of mine, a local artist, Jim Nichols, a young man that I greatly admire, who's done some of the most beautiful artwork I have ever seen. And I'd like to leave it with Jim, and Jim will take it from there. Jim Nichols.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up this evening. It's your participation and it's your support that helps us put on programs like this. So, we try to do it with UFOAZ and TCCC downtown, and we feel like this is a subject that's kind of passed over by the major media, and we feel like you deserve to know what's going on and have a broader knowledge of the UFO activity that's going on the planet. And so this is kind of a forum that we put together to help get this information out to the public, so an informed public can make intelligent decisions. And so this is our little bit to help put that out there. How many of you in the audience are familiar with the Billy Meier case? Can I see a show of hands? Okay. How many of you who are familiar with the case feel kind of a strange, a deep personal interest in it over other UFO cases and so forth? Okay, thank you. How many of you have not heard of the Billy Meier case? Put it that way. Okay. The story of Billy Meier. Billy Meier is his name is actually Edward Meier. His fascination is with tales of the American West, so hence he's been kind of nicknamed Billy. In January 1975, an event took place in Switzerland, in the rural lands near Zurich, the backwoods, where this man, Edward Meier, was contacted by beings who claimed to come from the Pleiadian star system. They claim they've been very interested and involved with the happenings on this planet for quite some time. This case was brought to the attention of some investigators here in Tucson, and in the years from 1975 on to about 1983, it was very well researched, primarily by retired Colonel Wendell Stevens here in Tucson, and an investigative team from Phoenix, headed by Lee and Britt Elders. Now, they've done extensive research into this case. They thought it was a hoax. They went to Switzerland to prove that it was a hoax. And they collected photographs and polygraph testimony and so forth. They had the photographs computer scanned, computer analyzed, and in fact they found that this was not a hoax. And the more they researched it, the more they found they were actually authenticating this case. Some of the notables who were involved in authenticating this case are IBM, the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, the Arizona State University, the U.S. Geological Survey, McDonnell Douglas Corporation, and Caltech. And it's also gone so far as even the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of our country, has validated the fact that, yes, indeed, that this one-armed farmer with a sixth grade education in Switzerland is, in fact, having contact with beings or spacecraft that they cannot identify. Those of you who are familiar with my artwork know that I've been profoundly affected and touched by this UFO contact. My interest in UFOs was rather marginal until 1980 when I saw the UFO contact from the Pleiades picture books. And these picture books have had a profound effect on people all over the world, not just myself. And one gentleman in particular who resides in Los Angeles, named J. Randolph Winters, who we know him as Randy, was equally affected by these pictures and so forth. And he's done what a lot of us would like to have done. He personally went to see Billy and went to personally investigate this case for himself. And we got to meet Randy last August in Mesa, and we're so much impressed by what he had to say and what he had to share with his personal experience, having spent 3 months at the Meier farm in Switzerland, that we felt it was time to bring this gentleman to Tucson and give him a chance to share his experiences with you folks here. So if you'll join me in welcoming Randy. I'll turn this over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Jim. Hi, Tucson. I was watching the hands go up. I've been talking about Billy for a long time. I joined his personal group in '85 and became a member of what's called the FIGU, which is a German acronym for Free Community of Interest in the Border and Spiritual Sciences and UFOlogy. And if you've read any German, when German language, they usually take all the words and stick them together in one great big word that kind of wraps around the page. And I could never begin to pronounce that, neither could anybody else, so they became to call it the FIGU. So my experiences date back there, and I've been talking about it for a long time, so I'm always interested how many people are really aware of the case and aren't. And it's fascinating wherever I go, anywhere in the world. The majority of people have either heard of it, or usually they'll have a book or a few pictures or something like that about the case. So how many of you have ever seen any of the pictures, Billy's pictures? You've probably seen them all over on every brochure, catalog, flyer, and has them. I even like the television shows that'll usually come out and say it's fake, but then they show his pictures for about 30 minutes, and usually don't even give credit to Billy for taking them. So I brought some with me tonight because they are always fun and kind of stimulating to look at. And I brought a few that you've probably seen and a few that you probably haven't seen, so I can, because visually it's always kind of exciting to look at them. I know for a lot of us, when we get interested in UFOs and so forth, we're pretty much left to the information that we see on television or coming to talks like this. And like Jim said, that wasn't enough for me. being a kind of a natural, curious, prove it to myself sort of person, I decided to go over and meet Billy myself. And I was a little surprised when I got there because Billy wasn't interested in talking to me. I was there for about 3 weeks and spent the whole 3 weeks cleaning out the barn, cutting grass, working in the garden, doing all sorts of things. And I remember for about the last week I was there at Billy's house. It's on hills up in the farm country. And when you step out the front of the house and you look to the left, there's this big hill, and that's the grassy area where they cut it all the time to feed the cows, right? I'm up there with a sling, cutting grass during the day at about 10,000 feet up, about to fall over. About every 30 minutes or so, I'd look around and I'd see Billy walk out the front door and just kind of look up at the hill to see if I was up there, you know, and I'd turn around and stop for a second, and he'd kind of run back in the house. And I thought, well, this is kind of peculiar. I've been here 3 weeks, and he kind of avoids me, but he's always kind of watching me all the time, you know, so. Came time to leave, I had to go. I couldn't stay any longer, so I had made real good friends with everybody else in the house, and they were wonderful in sharing all the information with me. And so I leave, and I get back on the plane and fly all the way back home, and the phone rings the next day, and it's Billy. I can come back now. It's okay. So I thought, I guess I passed the test or something. I took care of the grass and the cows real well, so it was okay to return. So I did. It was a few months before I could go back, but then I returned the following summer, and I got to stay there at the house and you know, get involved, and that's when it really opened up for me. My interest in learning more about it wasn't so much, I'm not an investigator. I've never gone and looked into a landing track or quizzed a witness or anything. It was just my own personal quest for wanting to know what was going on. I had felt very strongly for years that it was real. I had been plagued, maybe the word, with visions and dreams for years about it. I used to see Billy having the contacts all the time, and when I finally got over and started talking to him, we started swapping notes, and I think he was rather impressed that I knew all the things that I already knew about it. So then he invited me into his office and started showing me actually all the tons of writings and information that had been passed on to him. For those of you that aren't real familiar with it, let me back up just a little bit and tell you what's happened over there. A race of human beings that we share common ancestry with, that look exactly like us, they could be sitting here in the audience and we probably wouldn't notice it at all, began having contact with Edward Meier actually in 1937 because they caused him to be born. February 3rd, 1937, 11:20 in the morning, they procreate, they call it. They cause 4 spirits from what they call the fine matter world to come in to begin forming material bodies into what they call the coarse matter world. Okay? They did that on purpose, they said, because they wanted Edward Meier born at a particular time. He was 20 minutes early. So, but at least he got here at any rate. The other 3 people that were born were to be his backup. Throughout his life, they would receive telepathic transmissions. So they went to a lot of trouble already to study this spirit and have him be born at a particular time. At the age of 5, which a lot of people aren't aware of, Billy started having telepathic transmissions in his mind. He would start seeing symbols and images, unwanted, undesired, and he had not caused them at all with his own will. It wasn't a voice per se, but it was images, and then a voice or a feeling would kind of come in challenging him to figure out what the images or the symbols meant. Well, he didn't understand them at all, didn't go to his parents to try to solve this mystery. Instead, he turned to a local priest named Zimmerman, who by some odd chance seemed to be familiar with what was going on with him and started explaining to him that what was happening to him was thought of as telepathy, and that he should make an effort to try to remember what the symbols meant. He tried that, and once he finally understood that he wasn't crazy, he started trying to figure out what the symbols meant. Had some difficulty with it because he's quite young. The voice started coming more and more into his head, just started explaining what some of the symbols meant. Ideas and so forth started coming back into his mind. Now, he was only 5 years old. When he was 7 years old, he was led out into the forest area around where he lives, which at that point was Hinwil, Switzerland, north of Zurich. Bulach, Switzerland, was when he was 7. And he had his first physical contact. We're used to seeing UFOs, and they generally always look like a hubcap or a flying saucer type that we're used to seeing. This one did not. This one came down, and he described it like a child, what is looking like a pear, that it was thin at the top and came down around to the bottom and looked like a giant pear to him, and it didn't have the saucer shape to it whatsoever, and it was kind of a gleaming silver color. It settled down, picked him up. A gentleman had stepped out of it looking kind of like an old grandfather with white hair, maybe about 90 years old or so. Billy felt fairly comfortable around him for some reason. got into the craft with him, and spent about 4 hours in the craft. And at that point, it was explained to him all about why he was caused to be born and how his life came about. Well, during that time period, Billy also had to make a decision as to whether or not he wanted to continue with his mission that he had been chosen for in this particular life. So we have a 7-year-old child here already needing to make these kinds of decisions if he wished to continue with the symbols and the voice in his head and so forth. Well, to his benefit, before the contact was over, the man who came in the ship, who later he called by the name of Svath, did something to Billy's brain. Some device was put on his head, and as soon as it was put on, Billy remembers that everything changed. Suddenly he had phenomenal recall and memory. Most any kind of question that he wanted to quiz himself about, he immediately would know the answer. And all of these symbols that he'd been seeing for the last couple of years in his head immediately made sense to him like his home language did. And thousands of them and visions raced into his head all at one time. Apparently what they did is they opened up something in his spiritual subconscious so he could remember the images, feelings, and wisdom from previous lifetimes, things that we're not necessarily privileged to. And he was told at that time that was necessary so he could make the decision as to whether or not he would go on, and so he would also have the faculty to be able to see somewhat in his own future so he'd know what a tough time he was really going to have, because the lifetime that he's about to lead is not going to be an easy one at all. At that time he had 2 arms too. It isn't until a while later that he actually loses his left arm, as many of you probably know. So he got off to a pretty early start. It's only like 1942, 43, 44 now. The war's going on, and all this time without us knowing it, over in the forests of Switzerland, a little 7-year fella is about to have the most important contacts in our modern time. The contacts continued actually till he was 16, were mostly telepathic. At the age of 16, they were taken over by another race called Timmers, which there's very little publicized about and very few people are aware of. And this was the main, you might say, flux of his education entirely about extraterrestrials. There was a lady, and you'll see a picture of her later on that I brought, a lady that made contact with him by the name of Ascot. And she told him that she was actually from another universe, and that she would take over his education, that Svath had provided him with the necessary basic building blocks of understanding and had nurtured him telepathically nurtured him for years into developing the type of mind that would be able to understand the things that he was now going to be exposed to. During the next 3 years, what happened was Billy was picked up several times, and then he was called Edward, or Eddie. During the next 3 years, Eddie was picked up by Ascot on several occasions and taken to different epochs of time. Now, we're all interested all the time in learning things, but part of learning is taking little pieces at a time, and then you build your own truths, right? You're listening to me, and you listen to the things that I say. Some of it will make sense, some of it will skip right by, some of it won't make any sense. You may not agree with it at all. Anytime we listen to information, it really doesn't become part of us until we experience it, does it? We have to hear things about a certain subject. Ultimately, we get enough information on a subject and we develop a will or a feeling or an attitude about it. And then if it's strong enough, it becomes part of our life, doesn't it? And then that leads our life a particular direction. Then it's our own experience. You have your own knowledge about things and you speak to it from a foundation of truth then. Well, that was what they explained to Eddie at the time, that if he was going to be a prophet of our times and actually go on with the contacts that would happen later on, he had to have his own experiences about things, his own knowledges, so it was his own truth, just like we would do on our own. So at the age of 16, he made several travels with her through different periods of our time, going clear back into primitive times, actually watching the development of the planet. He was able to go through many of the biblical eras and see things for himself and see them as they actually happen. He even got to go on a fun excursion to the 16th century when Billy was asking some questions about, can I go back in time and like leave a bottle of Coke 400 years ago and then come back and dig it up? Now, we all think of things like that, you know, and of course, naturally at 16 you would entertain that thought. Well, I still would. He was allowed to do that. They took him back to the 16th century to a rabbi named Gicelli, and Billy took a lantern with him, a battery-powered lantern. And apparently this Gicelli, whoever it is, that had several contacts of his own, and wasn't even really surprised to see Billy. He left the lantern and explained how it worked. It was just a standard little lantern with like a big 9-volt battery and with a switch on it. And they explained a little bit, he did to Gicelli, how it works, the basic concept of electricity. 16th century France, right? Billy comes back, it's 1956. About 5 or 6 years after that, a friend of him comes to him with a book of history about that time period, and in the book, it talks about this Rabbi Gicelli, who was regarded by the local people as something of a magician. Because if you went to his house, strange lights would come out the window. It must be the work of the devil or something. And if you touched his doorknob, flashes of energy would jump out and bite you. You know, and there was even notations in there by the king at that time of France making note about the strange things that would go on with his rabbi. So he was able to take a battery-powered lantern on a ship, go back into time and leave it, and it affected history. Okay? On another occasion, and I'll show you a picture of this later on, it's in the slides I'm going to show you, and then I'll show you some of the pictures, then I'll try to explain some of these concepts. Imagine, if you will, that you were over at Billy's house and we wanted to challenge him a little bit on some of these ideas. Billy did this for a group once. He got 5 or 6 of the people that live at the house with him who began to always be involved in these contacts as they continued on. And he was explaining to them how that one of the ships on one particular occasion had damaged a tree and the top of the tree was missing. Billy comes home dragging the top of the tree in tow, and he's explaining to everybody how the ship, some radiation from the ship damaged the tree. He goes back to show them where it's at, and the tree isn't there. Now, I'm going to show you the picture of the tree in a little while, and if you go over to Switzerland now, where it's not there, okay? But this is a large tree. We're not talking a little bush. It's a big tree, right? The tree's not there, plus the people in Billy's household who know the area well tell Billy he's nuts. There never was a tree there. And he said, well, I got a picture of it. And he got them developed, and the pictures came back of the tree. And he said, I've got the top of the tree right here. And nobody's believing him. They're thinking Billy, has seen just a few too many things in the sky, right? Well, we naturally would, So he was challenged to, try to explain that. So he had some aid in that. About a month later, they came back, and they provided a demonstration where Billy took 5 or 6 people from the house. Everybody got a camera. He took them out on a road about a mile away from where the farm is right now, and they're walking down the road, and he stops everybody and says, all right, everybody look in front of you and get in your mind's eye what you're seeing right in front of you. Look at all the trees and the bushes and everything and take a picture. Everybody lines up. You can just imagine them all standing there looking out the forest, flashing their little instamatics, whatever. He says, okay, come on. And he walks them down the road, and they think they're all really going to see something down the road, right? They get down the road, and he's just standing there talking about anything for like about 2 or 3 minutes, and they're all waiting for something to happen. And he says, now let's go back. He takes them all back to the same spot they're at, and he says, okay, what's different? Nobody sees anything different at all. And he says, take another picture. There was a tree missing right there, and nobody really spotted it because there were so many trees in the area. So 5 people took a picture, developed their film, and it came back, and all 5 of them found a missing tree. So just in a short space of time, they demonstrated the technology where they could take a material matter, cause it actually to exist in another time frame, and even erase the reminiscence from the people. So we're talking about some rather serious technology here. One of the reasons I have a drawing board here tonight is that becoming a member of the group over there, I got the privilege of, once you're in the group, then you are dumped kind of with these several thousand pages of information. It's like, study this. If you're going to be in the group, you have to know these principles and understand this, and that's why I went over there anyway to get that. So I have all of them. It's about that thick altogether, thousands of pages of information on just about any subject that you care to answer a question on later on. So I brought a board with me because some of the really fun stuff to explain is a little how time works. I'm going to show you on a drawing tonight of how the universe actually was created and how life evolved in it, kind of a thumbnail sketch of it. And I'll give you just a quick rundown a little bit about how the spirit reacts in creation and how a material life cycle actually works. It's pretty fascinating. So, okay. That's actually a postcard I picked up in Los Angeles. I had it for years. I thought it was a good thing to focus on to get the slides, in fact. But I thought the symbolism was kind of interesting. 2 planets with a brain sort of in the middle, Okay, this picture here is rarely very seen. It's not in any of the books. And during the time when Billy was 16 to 19, he was led out into the world to actually try to learn to understand more about man and philosophy and life. And he spent several years on the road, actually 11 years, mostly in India, Pakistan, and in the eastern areas, studying things. During that time period, he had several contacts. And there's a couple of pictures here, black and white. This is at an ashram in India where that contact actually took place. These pictures here, the first few pictures are ones that you've probably seen in most of the books, advertisements, brochures. They're quite commonly seen. They're called beam ships. Oddly enough, they don't call them UFOs. They call them beam ships because the original device by which they invented for the drive systems was a light emitting system. They said they used the word diode system, light emitting of some kind for below light speeds. The ship is 7 meters in diameter, roughly 21 feet in our measurements, can carry a crew of 3 people, and you can kind of look at it as like their cars, their automobiles. When a person wants on their world, needs transportation, these are provided for them because part of the ship is made especially for the individual. They've gone beyond the computer age, you might say, and kind of into growing your own organic intelligence age, where much of the ship actually thinks, responds to their thoughts, will protect them when they're outside of the ship and so forth. The ship you're looking at here is called a beam ship. It is of their older technology. And they decided when they began to have the contacts with Billy, he's called Billy when these started, his contacts with this group, who are called Pleiadians, began January 28th in 1975, when this strain of pictures began. The beam ships was an old design, and they decided to use this one because they said that subconsciously, very many of us, almost 2/3 of the known white race of the planet Earth, spirit has at one time or another lived on another planet a long time back, that we are an integrated race, and if they use this design of ship, it will be comfortable to most of those people. Somewhere deep within your spiritual consciousness, not your material consciousness, this will seem familiar and ring true to many people. They have a lot of other designs. The normal saucer shape like you're looking at here is normally used on planets where there's atmosphere or water. It has nothing really to do with the drive systems on the newer ships. The old beam ships, though, did need the large flat surface on the bottom because they worked on the principle of wave technology. Also on this one, it might be a little hard to see, but right below the rim of the ship, you see a faint yellowish area there. This is one of the ship that was, pictures that was examined very closely because up close in that yellowish area, what you're seeing is the reflection of the ground below, and you can see plants and so forth in the bottom down there. So, here's one of the few pictures on the ground. Most of the time when Billy would have a contact, he would receive this cooling sensation on his forehead that would let him know to pay attention to the next thoughts, because that would be them leading him out to some location in seclusion where they could have the contact. When the ship came in, it generally would come in and not touch on the ground. They were being very careful for some reason about not leaving evidences. Apparently when they went into these contacts, they were very careful all along the way about what they did. Most of the time the ship would just simply hover off the ground, and the lady that was in the ship would get out and have meetings with Billy. On some occasions they would actually sit down on the ground on like tripod legs, and he did get quite a few pictures. Billy lives out in the country, and every time he would shoot pictures of the ones that you're going to see right now, he would take 2 or 3 rolls of film. He'd mail them into Zurich, mail order getting the film developed. Usually only one would come back. He told me that out of all the pictures that he has left, which is about 1,100, he probably shot 3 times that many. Most of them are missing or in private collections. This is actually one of the pictures done by Jim Nichols, the man who spoke to you before. And in response to a request by some people who wanted a picture of one of the beings, this was drawn. His contacts begin. They were from a group of people that we now call Pleiadians. We've come to call them that because they say they are from the star cluster we call the Pleiades. The Pleiades is a name that we have given thousands of years ago throughout our literature to old folk stories. You've all read about it in the Quran and the Bible, so forth, and that word came up. And they say they are from that area of the sky. This is a real photograph through a telescope of what the Pleiades looks like. It's sometimes referred to as the Little Dipper, Daughters of Seven, Seven Sisters, something like that. So you can see the 7 stars. The top right star is called Tegeta, and that's the area that they come from. That's approximately about 450 light years away from us. And here you can see, I had a little drawing here so you can see where it's at. Now those little ships come here in 7 hours and travel about 450 to 500 light years. So they're moving along very fast. For those of you who haven't gone light speed lately, light is 186,000 miles in 1 second. Okay, so that's roughly 7 times around the planet Earth in 1 second, to give you an idea. Most of us are used to going 55 miles in 1 hour. But if you can go 186,000 miles in 1 second, okay, 60 seconds, take 60 times it, that's how far you'd go in a minute, 60 times that in an hour, 24 times that to a day, multiply times a week and times a year, and that's what a light year is. In other words, the distance, approximate distance that light would travel in 1 year's time is the theory. So it's an immense number. And they're 450 of those years away, and they get here in 7 hours. Here's an artist drawing of what the galaxy is that you and I live in. We live in a galaxy that we've been calling the Milky Way, and that's because from our position where we're at, we look down into it, and it has a milky look to it when you see all of the billions and billions of stars down there. And you can see off to the left over here, it says sun's position, yeah, to the left, and that's relatively where we are, where we live. If we flew up on top of it and looked down at our galaxy, if we could get outside of it, this is home. And you can see we kind of live out on the outer edge in the suburbs, so to speak, of the galaxy. Their technology, they informed Billy that it's 53,000 light years to the center of our galaxy. So it's an immense distance across it. It's probably in excess then of 120,000 light years to travel across the galaxy that we live in. And they're only 450 light years away, so that's just in the neighborhood by comparison. So we have some giant leap forwards in technology to get into before that, this kind of distances are accessible to us. Billy's contacts begin then almost regularly on a weekly basis. The contacts were almost all with a lady from the Pleiades who said her name was Semyasi. She said that she and her race had decided to undertake a series of contacts with him. He was expecting it to happen after his many contacts earlier in life. They told him it would happen. And they intended to have a series of ongoing contacts as long as it served their interest. The contacts would begin and go kind of in stages of development, and along the way they would be careful about the types of information and things they were going to do. And to begin with, they were going to allow him to start taking photos, because up to that time there really were no high-quality photos of extraterrestrial craft that any of us had ever seen. When these photos started appearing in European magazines in 1975 and finally made their way to America by benefit of Wendell Stevens around 1979, most of the world was very surprised. Most of the world thought they were complete phonies because they were too good to be true. And we've always wanted to see good pictures like that, and when we got them, most people didn't believe it because we just weren't used to anything quite that good. But then he started providing them every week, hundreds of them. And then he started taking movie footage. He's got an hour or so of movie footage of a variety of different craft coming in some cases up to 4 craft coming in and hovering around. He also has, and I brought some pictures with me, you'll see one episode here, the ship's going to come in and literally land right in the front yard about 20 feet in front of him. And I brought those pictures with me too so you could see that. That tree I told you about earlier that was missing, that's the tree that this ship is going around. On this sequence of shots, Billy was trying to get pictures so he could show people, have something in the picture to compare the size of the ship to. And this is the tree that was damaged and is no longer there. The Lyrians came here, were generally 7 to 9 meters tall, came from different worlds, different sizes, different atmospheric pressure, were very large beings. White skin, mostly white hair or blonde hair, blue-eyed race. At that time, apparently they were very warlike, a very treacherous race of individuals, had very high technologies, and generally just took over different planets and pretty much dominated this end of the galaxy. Apparently they had kind of a reign of terror which lasted for a long time, and then through very large decisive wars, almost self-destructed their own race. It was built back up again. Again, they were very warlike. They went through a series of episodes like that. The most recent history dates back 380,000 years, where a very large colony of these Lyrians, about 144,052 of them, came to Earth in one particular time to avoid large wars in their area. And this was the beginning of the old kind of legendary 144,000 of light beings that you hear much about in different kinds of folk stories that's handed down. They said it started back then, that the 144,052 were by no means the good guys. That 144,000 were actually kind of what they considered the immoral group who left during wartime and came here. They hid out here for a period of time and had a large colonization on the planet Earth. After a while it died out and many of them left. After that happened, there was repeated small colonizations for a period of time. leading up to about 230,000 years back, when at that time in the Lyra section of the sky a great war broke out again, and many of them fled towards the end of the war. I guess the ones that were losing, it wasn't going well for them. Part of that was a very large group of them led by a leader named Arisil. Arisil took off with a large group of the Lyrian people. They took off with a lot of ships and so forth and fled out into space. Those people apparently spent a couple of years trying to find some place to rebuild their society, landed and became what we now call the Pleiadians. And this is the descendants of the people that Billy's having contacts with. So we share common ancestry, they say. Because of that, they look at us a little bit like little brothers. And that's really their only kind of concern. They say, due to what they call the laws of creation, the basic morality or logic of the universe itself, they feel kind of a responsibility to help us along during difficult times, but their own personal laws of morality do not allow them to interfere in our political, our power structures, or our free will. They openly admit from time to time they kind of broadcast subconscious feelings and so forth that we pick up, and Albert Schweitzer was one that they mentioned, that many people were being broadcast ideas that they pick up in their subconscious in their dreams, but their idea is whatever you do with those ideas is of your own free will, so they don't feel like that they're interfering. So that's mostly how they do it, and they were quite clear that in no case do they ever allow the individual who has picked up the ideas to know where it came from an outside influence. That to them is violating your personal rights of free will, your own path of evolution. So that's kind of where they draw the line. They went on to explain that these Lyrians on several colonizations came back. The largest colonization was 50,000 years back when a ruler named Pleiadian came along. Interesting name. This one, though, has great significance to our current society. At that particular time, the developing race on Earth, which was the brown-skin race, which were the long descendants of the Indian race here on the planet, which was our original race, was the only thing really here. The Pleiadian race came, which were Lyrians. Pleiadian himself was what they call an Ishwish. And in their terminology, Ishwish is a word that means king of wisdom. An individual who has lived so many lifetimes, gathered so much wisdom, that he is the king of most of the physical and natural laws, and has spiritual developments to the point where things like telepathy, telekinetic powers, and so forth are commonplace to an individual like this. It also shows in the records that Pleiadian was over 35 feet tall. And most of the Lyrians that came with him are 12 to 15 feet tall. So a very large race. Here's the interesting part. The then developing Earth human beings, as they keep referring to us in there, it says that during the time of Pleiadian is where the concept of God started on our planet. That the brown-skinned race then referred to as Pleiadian as the creator. They felt that he had the power to actually create life, and they felt that he did. And apparently Pleiadian did nothing to really dispute that. He probably thought he had good control over all the locals at that time. Yet the language on Earth at that time, the word God is how Ishwish translated. And that's where the concept started in the thinking, they say, on our planet of the idea that there is a physical God where people are made in the image. Pleiadian started that apparently. His civilization lasted for about 10,000 years. At that particular time, they left. There was nothing going on here for a period of time for about 7,000 years. At 33,000 years back, they say, something really interesting happened, which then contributed to the life that we have here on Earth. A being from a Vega constellation named Atlant came with a wife named Caratide. They founded on the great landmass, which used to be between Africa and South America, and founded what we call in folklore Atlantis. And it was named after him. Caratides had a father named Muras, M-U-R-A-S, who was a Lyrian. He came and founded the city of Mu in the Gobi Desert. Mu became what is known as Lemuria. And much like the British Commonwealth, both continents established colonies all over the planet, and over a period of several thousand years, there was a very large population sprung up on the planet during those times. They lived very peacefully with very high technology till about 13,000 years back. So they had a long span then of pleasant living on the planet and high technology. At that point, a third faction, led by a ruler named Eris, came, started causing problems between the two, ultimately led to a decisive war where Atlantis attacked Mu. Apparently it was a very swift war. They both had very high technologies. Mu was the more advanced of the race. Atlantis was much larger, more numbers, but both sides had space travel and very high technologies. And this could be a lesson that we may learn from. Apparently, one morning, Atlantis decided to attack quickly and swiftly to be the victor. They launched tens of thousands of their spacers, they said, which had what they called dissolving rays. They said it's not like our bombs. At that point, they had the technology to actually convert matter back into fine matter, into energy. And they could focus some sort of device on a mountain, a ship, or anything, and it would convert to fine matter and stay that way. In other words, just convert it like to ether. It's gone. So that's what they did. Thousands of ships immediately converged on Mu and the other cities and dissolved them within a matter of moments. Mu never got a chance to even fight back. But, however, on the other hand, the people of Mu who were prepared for this and expecting it says in there, had flown out into the asteroid belt which existed at that time, had taken a very large asteroid and launched it towards Earth. And at the time, about an hour after Atlantis was celebrating their great victory, this asteroid hit the planet. Right as it hit the atmosphere, it exploded with such a force that at that time Florida was where Greenland is now, and it rocked the planet off its axis, busted the Atlantic Ocean on the floor right there, and the continent sunk. The water was so high it ran completely over into the area where the Mediterranean was and flooded all through Egypt completely. The pyramids and all of that area was underwater for quite a bit of time. The air was unbreathable, they say, for almost 50 years. That was roughly 11,040 years back on June 6th, if we had a calendar, they said. They were always very exact. It was even 10 o'clock in the morning, they said. So it changed a lot of things on the planet. One, hardly anybody existed here any longer. Life was, not very good after that. There were 3 existing tribes of people, they say, left on Earth at that particular time. There was one race, which was the surviving brown race of Indians. There was the Hebrew race at that time in northern Africa, and there was a race around the Black Sea. Those 3 tribes were pulled together and came under the ruling of the leader that survived named Eris. Okay? The only other high technology or highly evolved race that existed at that time was the Sumerians, who had escaped the wars and hid out over in the Himalayas and in that area and survived it. They were very peaceful, wanted no part of it, and hid out and actually survived it. It is the survival of the Sumerians who have kind of hand-me-downed the knowledge or of what is thought of as Eastern philosophy today, which they're saying is probably the closest to actually the way things really are. That if you can get your hands on some of the old Sanskrit information, that is the closest and most accurate information to what life is actually all really about. Well, while they're getting the slide thing fixed here, by the way, the 3 races were pulled together, and that was the beginning. The leader at that time, his name was Jehav, Jehav. He also was an Ishwish. And interestingly enough, historically, this is where the concept of the Jewish nation was founded. Jehav was a very strong ruler, very wicked, pulled the 3 races together, apparently demanded all sorts of blood sacrifices and terrible things to dominate the planet. He pulled the Hebrew race together, what we're calling the Hebrew race. He embedded in their subconscious that they would become a race because of him. And they would follow him because he was the power of the universe, he was the creation of all things, and they were his chosen people to follow him. And that is the concept, they say, where that feeling that the Jewish nation has about being the chosen people started. That was roughly 6,500 years back. Jehav lived for 3,500 years, had a son who was Jehovah, who was usually figured as being responsible for that, but it wasn't. It was actually his father named Jehav. There was 3 or 4 after him, and around the time period that we think of as the year 0, or at the time of Christ, there was hardly any extraterrestrials left on the planet whatsoever. Most of them had gone to other systems because this was becoming an undesirable planet to live on for them. The last traces of the large beings were what we think of as Greek mythology. Like Hercules was 3.5 meters tall. Noah was 7 meters tall. And there's a listing in Billy's notes of most of the Greek mythology characters, where they came from and their size and how they lived and so forth. It was decided apparently by a Pleiadian ruler at that time, and his name is not provided, that a very highly evolved spirit should be pulled through at that time to continue the legacy of the knowledge that was known of the creation itself. And at that point, they say they caused the procreation of a man named Emmanuel, who was one of the older spirits that they knew of and came from a race called Lawsons, who only live on one planet somewhere are a very highly evolved race. They've lived more lifetimes than most any of the other races have. Consequently, their ability and their knowledge is great. Emmanuel, of course, became the lifetime of what is now known as Jesus Christ. In the year 189, his name was changed to say Jesus Christ on the paperwork, and it was his life that Christianity was founded upon. That common ancestry was from the Lyrians. There is very few Lyrians left. They pretty much destructed themselves. The ones that are left live in peace these days and are a very peaceful race and get along with the Pleiadians, but they very seldom make contact with us. What you're looking at here are the landing tracks of a couple of Lyrian craft that came on one particular occasion to visit Billy. Here's one out in front of the house where a Lyrian ship has come in the middle of the night, woke the whole house up. Almost a dozen people got to come out, see the thing. A Lyrian being came out and talked to them for a few minutes and left. So this is just a picture of a metal sample. This metal sample, along with a few others through Wendell Stevens, was provided to Marcel Vogel at IBM years ago and provided the basis for some analysis of the metal of the craft. And to make a long story short, they provided several samples that were explained as different stages that they make. Primarily, the ships are made from a lead and produced into an alloy. They go to planets and suns where the atmosphere itself is lead base. They then take the atmosphere and they mine the lead out of that somehow. It is then mixed with other things and goes through a series, a stage of development where the metal is made from that. And then the last 2 or 3 stages, they were a little secret about how they actually, get the finished product or whatever, but that was the basis for it. They didn't mind giving us the particular pieces that they did, they said, because we wouldn't be able to recreate it anyway. We don't have the technology to create the process that actually puts the metal together and makes it tough enough so that it could be used for space travel. Okay. Well, that's okay, because I don't know what order they were in anyway. That's why I keep looking. So. You notice this ship's a little different design. Okay, this is not as familiar to us. It's not of an older design. You notice the edges around it are kind of rippled a little bit. It's about the same size, but unlike the old beam ships, this ship has the ability to actually move in time. That they'd figured out technically what time is, that it is a series of pulses or waves of energy that actually animate matter. And it is possible, once it is understood, that you can actually move in time. And this was the ship they used for that. This is a drawing of what Semjase looked like. There was only a couple of pictures ever taken, and unfortunately they've never really been released out into the world, but this was a drawing of what she actually looked like. This, and I see how... I mentioned earlier to you that when Billy was young, he had some contacts with another race, and her name was Ascot. They are not related at all to the Pleiadians. They only became friends when Ascot and her people came into this area, discovered the planet Earth, and traced the seed of our humanity back to the Pleiadians, and they became friends and exchanged technology. But this is the lady that Billy had contacts with when he was a teenager. And their bone structure is slightly different. Their fingers are a little different. You may notice the earlobes are lower. They come down to the jawbone, and they're forward about a half an inch more than ours are. Their ears are a little more forward set. They're far older than the Pleiadians, and by that I mean ages of lifespans. As we move through lifespans, we gather in wisdom, and that's how we grow spiritually. They were far older than the Pleiadians, and had advanced to the point where she had almost total recall in her subconscious of all of her thoughts within her lifetime. By the way, their lifespan had increased quite a bit too. The Pleiadian lifespan is somewhere between 700 to 1,000 years, and this race of people that Ascot comes from was even much longer than that. This is a picture of Billy. You notice the long beard. He started growing that in the early 80s, and when he moved up into the high country where he lives now. This is a unique drawing. I have a separate tape. Among the many things that Billy was allowed to do when he was young, at the age of 19, on one of the time travel trips, they took him back to a time when Emmanuel was alive. And Billy said he actually got to speak to Emmanuel. Well, that didn't go over real well in public. In 1975, when Billy began giving talks, and he says he's gone back to the year 32 and actually talked to Christ. It still doesn't go over very well with a lot of people. But on that trip, they drew a picture of what he looked like. And this is a likeness here, apparently, of what the man looked like, Billy says, when he met him. He didn't actually get this close to the ship. This is a blow-up done by the computer to try to analyze the pictures. I was never part of the investigative team, but those that were involved in it, which include Jim Dilatosa and some other people at JPL, could never conclude it was extraterrestrial exactly, because we don't know really how to prove that. All they could really do was come to the conclusion that the pictures were not faked, that there was no way that Edward Billy Meier could have come up with pictures like these. They did find out later on, though, through testing the film over and over again, that they were able to detect electromagnetic fields of some type coming off the ships. Thermograms were done, but we weren't able really to figure out too much about it because we just don't plain have the technology to do that. Oh, this is cute. This is Billy, and he's got some sort of gun. At one particular point, he asked them if they carried sidearms. And he says, no, that we don't normally do that because the ships actually protect us. There's not really any need for that, that if we are attacked or something, the ships follow our thoughts all the time anyway, and they would protect us. And the knowledge that's aboard the ship is far more deadly than any hand arm we could probably carry anyway. Well, Billy wanted to know if in their past they actually had something, guns like we did. Well, they provided him with this thing that you're looking at. And it was some sort of ceremonial gun. They told him that they got out of their kind of museums and brought for him to play with. Well, all over the farm there's holes and things. He shot it at trees, twigs, rocks, and so forth. It seems to work on some sort of antimatter principle. There are two pods you can kind of see on the gun. When you squeeze the trigger, different particles come out of the two pods. There's no light or sound, but wherever you're aiming at for a range up to 37 kilometers is just gone. And it shoots a beam about 1 inch in diameter. Billy tried it out all afternoon. He would point and aim it at something, maybe even a mile away, and then they'd get the car and run over there, and just the twig would be shot off. So he had a lot of fun with it at any rate. Here you can see it a little bit closer, and you can see the arm of the lady whose name is Manira, who actually brought him the gun to play with at that time. Well, that tree's still standing there, and that hole's several years old. There apparently wasn't sound or anything, but whatever it would hit, it would leave like that charred image, just as whatever he would shoot a hole in. So he took some sound recordings on a couple of different occasions, and when he was doing it, he would try to get a picture underneath the ship. So I think there's a couple of them here. Yeah, right underneath the ship. Unfortunately, an interesting side effect, Billy got gamma radiation, is what they call it at the hospital, burns inside of his body. And this possibly came from these contacts here, where they actually opened the screens up around the ship, which normally protect their vision and the radiation from some of the ships coming off. And it got into his body, his gun, his boots, and his shoes, and he had a lot of trouble for a period of time. He still has some damage in his lungs from the burns from this. You'll notice the numbers on some of these. If you visit Billy's house, they have a guest patio out in front, and there's a little guest book you can sign, and then they have the picture books. There's 5 of them, and all the pictures are numbered. There's about 1,100 pictures in the book, and then you can order them if you want, and this, of course, is picture 227. Billy, quite often, after the contacts began, people would constantly quiz him, well, ask them this or ask them that. And he was always asked to try take a picture this way or that way or through a fence post or something, so they could design more ways to figure out if these pictures were real. And here you can see he's taking a picture with his tripod in the front, and there's 3 craft out floating over a very large open area out there. So the concept of models was totally ruled out. Here there wouldn't be any way that you could actually do it. This is an interesting one. You might have to look at it just for a second. Down in the bottom left is the picture of a ship, and you notice it's green. Billy's taking this picture from inside one ship through the window as it's taking off from Earth. There's one ship right in front of him, and if you look out in front, there was another. There was 3 ships that day. On that particular jaunt, he got to go see Mars, Jupiter, and Venus and come back in 2 hours and 27 minutes and shot several rolls of film of all those planets. Venus, he says, by the way, and he has a whole 3 or 4 page thing, which I have. It's all the statistics all about Venus. Venus actually, he says, looks kind of like the moon, but it's cloud covered, and it's a surprise. It's not jungly at all. It's not moist, whatever there. It actually just looks like a crater. And it was explained to him that Venus originally was not in the location that it's currently at. Venus originally was a moon around Uranus. 8,000 years back, it was pulled out of its orbit that it was currently in. It was in an unstable orbit for quite a period of time. At 6,000 years and roughly 4,000 years back, its orbit again was changed. And at 3,453 years back, it went into its present orbit. Originally, it was ice-covered and solid. On its last orbit, it swung close around the sun and moved into its present orbit, was greatly heated up, and that's why it's cloud-covered today. Now it's a very hot planet at about 500 degrees Fahrenheit and just about the temperature of molten lead. Well, so far we've been talking about contacts with physical beings, with beings just like ourselves who we share a common ancestry with. Now I'm going to show you something a little bit more unusual. What you're looking at here woke the whole house up one night. This bar of light, that's Billy's house in front, and there's 2 or 3 cars parked right there. He had a camera with him, and he and some of the other people in the house started snapping pictures. They didn't know what it was. Billy's sensitivity and telepathic abilities weren't too bad. He was used to receiving transmissions. He tried sending pulses to this energy source, whatever it is. Nothing responded. The thing apparently changed shape, moved around, zipped around all over the place. It woke up the whole area. There were several people up and down the road watching this situation. Even the local sheriff counterpart, whatever they call him over there, the constable came. He took a couple of pictures. Up in the sky was a very large, bright object that kind of looked like a sun, very bright, as this thing kept moving around and changing shape. That's the bright part of it up in the sky up there. They got a picture of that. Eventually what happened was this thing that's whipping around all over the farmyard shot back up into that very large ball of light and just disappeared. Here, if you look at it closely, it's huge. Just before it disappeared, it went and spread out over this big open area by where they live. And judging from the size, you can see the ground down below it. That thing could be several blocks long. It's no way of really telling how big it is. It changed shape many times before it finally disappeared. What happened was, after it disappeared, Billy not knowing what it was, the next contact that he had with the Pleiadians, he asked them about what happened. Surely they must have been aware of it because it had to be some higher form of intelligence. They didn't know. They said that they keep like a ring around the planet all the time that detects any type of incoming craft. Because incoming craft, whenever they get close to the planet Earth, are forewarned that this planet is watched by them and some other races, because there's quite a few barbaric races out there that come by also. But they didn't detect anything at all and were quite kind of confused by it. It took a while before they even had an explanation. When they came back with an explanation, all they could tell him was that they were very surprised because it appeared that Billy and the group at his house, what they had seen and taken pictures of, and what you may have seen there was probably the first ever pictures of what is termed a collective consciousness. This is not a ship. It's some sort of energy projection. And they had never seen one even themselves. They had only heard about it. But apparently Billy had had so many contacts for so long, some energy form was curious and came by, never identified itself, and never came back. So you're probably looking at the first ever pictures of a collective consciousness. The contacts, the physical contacts continued. There was 115 of them up through 1978. During those contacts, thousands of pages of notes were amassed, and the 20-some-odd people that lived at the house with Billy, almost all of them at one time or another got to go out, see the ships, wave. They frequently came by the house. For all of those people, it's a very real, very true thing. The contacts then stopped, and it wasn't again until 1981 that Billy's contacts, he had a physical contact then where this series of pictures you're going to see now were taken. They've never been really investigated. Many people have a lot of trouble believing they may or may not be real or whatever, but they're certainly different than what we've seen before. This ship has come to be called the wedding cake because of the strange balls all over it, and it's certainly different than anything else we've seen. It was explained to Billy that it was an experimental craft, that it wasn't even their technology, that another race that they were having commerce with and so forth that helped them technically develop some new devices, and this was a test ship that worked on an entirely different principle. We're learning now and we're hearing terms like hyperspace and null time and folding time and things like that, which are leading us to the very beginnings and understandings of how the universe matrix actually works. This ship doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It actually displaces itself from one spot of the galaxy and just reappears at another. There's close to a 7-minute time lapse somehow caused by the time waves of time themselves. But this ship doesn't have to speed up and make any kind of jump. It just blinks out and reappears where it's supposed to go to. It can only do that, though, within a galaxy. It does it based on certain energies provided by the galaxy itself. Outside of a galaxy, it has to use a different method for travel. The same time that Billy took these pictures, he also took movie film of it that never has really been out at all. But he has it over at the house. He's got a 5-minute and 10-second movie footage of this ship also coming in flying by the tree. I have no idea what the balls are for. I mean, they always draw attention. And like they mentioned earlier, the old beam ships would be comfortable to us. Most people, to this, looks kind of alien. This is an uncomfortable view to a lot of people. Here it's coming in right around the house, and it's coming in, as you can see, right over this little van there. I can tell you all about that van. I lived in it for a summer. That was where I slept. It's my bedroom there you're looking at. That's 6 foot wide and about 12 feet long, so you can get a rough idea how big this thing is. It's coming in around the house. That's Billy's house in the background, and he's run up real close and get as close as he can. He has kind of a little Instamatic type camera. It's a 35 millimeter. It's jammed on just short of f/16, and since he has one arm, he just snaps all the time with and rolls the film forward with his thumb. It's got a winder on the back, but he can't change the focus, and he insists on using that camera all the time because he can run it so well with his hand. People all over the world have sent him all sorts of equipment and offers of cameras, but he still uses the little one. So some of these pictures, even the angle and so forth, is a little off. But that's his house in the background. And as you can see, it's coming down. It sits right on the ground. There was actually 3 people with him that day. They spent the whole afternoon there. In Billy's private photo book, which he has over at the house, you see pictures of the beings actually coming out of here, coming into the living room and sitting on the couch. They were there the whole afternoon, kind of hanging around the house, and didn't leave until it got dark. He, years ago, got kind of frustrated with a doubting world that was calling him names and making fun of him, and decided no longer would he let any other information out of the house and just quit doing it. So unfortunately, there's still quite a bit of evidences, pictures, and movie film over there that he has no interest in letting out any longer. So we're missing out on some of the good stuff. Here it is at night, the same ship when it's leaving. The green light, that's the, out in front of the house, there's like a big parking lot there, and they have these big tall lampposts and so forth. Whoops, that one's a little out of order there. I've had a little fun with this one. I've blown it up, digitized it, taking looking glasses to it because it was so close, and we've tried to see, exactly what it might be made of, and it looks like at the time that it was there was some loose objects laying around on it, in which we couldn't figure out what it was. So they may have actually even been working on the thing that day. We're not really too sure. Now, I know you can't tell it, and you'll have to look at this kind of close, but that ship that you just looked at, the gold one that's hovering, it's in the air, but it's too high up, and you don't see it in the picture. Billy had run over underneath the ship to take a picture of it from straight below. And if you look, I probably can't see it in here, but he's standing in the middle of that ring. And that's his head and his arms sticking up in the middle. He's holding his camera up in the air to take a picture. And that's his legs right in the middle of it coming down. If you look kind of closely, you can barely see them. At the time the picture was taken, the person taking the picture didn't even notice the rings. And when this film was snapped and developed, came back, some of the energy coming off the ship just happened to surround Billy at the time that the picture was snapped. We've got this very unusual picture here of how the magnetic field, or whatever it is, off of the ship affects the air. Okay, this is the last picture here, so we can get the lights. Okay, watch your eyes. Yeah. Okay, just going to suggest that. Tell you what, we'll stretch. I'll see you all back here in 10 minutes. How's that? Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, all right.
First, are you enjoying this so far? Yeah. If you like this and would like to get into a little more greater depth with this and have more chance for Q&A and actual time talking to Randy, we're having a workshop with Randy at our home tomorrow, and we do have limited seating available for that. We have maybe 10 more seats for 10 more people. Okay, and that's at $20 per person. You can sign up at the registration table out front, $30 per couple. Okay. Also out front, oh, I forgot the items. Out front we have we're having a raffle. We have 3 items for 50-cent raffle. We have one of Randy's videos, Pleiadian Connection. We have one of my posters, art posters with the Catalinas and 2 UFOs in it, which is based on an actual sighting. It happened in 1976 here in Tucson. And Wendell's new 1993 UFO calendar. So if any of you would like to participate in that, they're 50 cents a pop. And we have a box also out at the registration table. Lastly, we have a questionnaire that we appreciate you participating in. June is going to be handing these out. It's just little comments you care to make on our presentation here, what you like, what you don't like. Was the facility satisfactory, location, parking, so on and so forth. This is printed on both sides to preserve paper, so 2 people can share one of these. We don't need your name and address or anything, just comments in general on how you like the program. And with that, no further ado, we'll let you take a break, and we'll see you back here. We'll be starting up in 10 minutes. Thank you. The lighting on those night scenes with the wedding cake thing, is that ambient light that's coming from his light system out there in the parking lot, or is that a light generated?
So it seems to be
from the
illumination
craft?
probably from the craft. I
Okay.
think probably just the radiation from the craft somehow just affected the film.
Okay.
He said he didn't use a flash, but there are light posts out there. So
Well, you can see, obviously, the car is
Yeah.
illuminated, and if you look closely, some of the buildings around there are illuminated. Interesting.
Randy,
Yeah.
when you do questions and answers, please repeat the question.
Oh.
Good point. Yeah. Well, I'll do a quick commercial then, because several people asked me during the time. Much of the information that I talk about is in books in German and is normally not available to people. For those that are interested, I just made this tape set. It's 16 audio tapes. There are 16 90-minute tapes which explain pretty much in depth most of all the information that was given to Meier over the several years. It not only deals with the things that you're talking about tonight, but goes in greatly into depth in a lot of other subjects. The 8 tapes over here cover all of his meetings. It's the general information from the 3 years of physical contacts. The tapes on this side are on other subjects, on areas that he wrote books about that are only in German. There is one book just on spirituality that I made 2 tapes out of. Their entire explanation of science, the universe, incarnations, the life force, things like that. There's all that sort of information. There's a tape on the prophecies. There's one that explains what meditation is, how it affects the brain, how you build will, force, things like that. There's an interview with Billy on it, about an hour and a half long. I set him down at the kitchen one day and asked him questions until he gave up and quit. And that tape's on here, so you can listen to that. So there's quite a different barrage of information on here. And I thought after a number of years that I should do that, because unfortunately the books, it looks like, are never really going to come out in English, so you'd have a chance to read them. So I just finished making this week. We'll be shipping it out next Friday. There's a little book that goes with it also, because there's a lot of diagrams and explanations of things that comes along with it. So anybody who is interested in getting that, you can let me know after the show, or if you're coming tomorrow at the workshop, that's fine. 16 tapes in a book. It's $99.95, and it'll be being shipped out next Friday for anybody who's interested. So, okay, yeah. Yeah, he was in Switzerland in a little area called. He lives in the north end of, he speaks Swiss German and writes German, yeah. Well, there's 5 languages I know in Switzerland, I guess depending on the area that you're in, and I'm not sure exactly what Swiss is. He reads and writes German mostly.
Second question I have. He must have had an awful lot of economists to make so many pictures so tiny.
Actually, the question was about the pictures. There are a little over 1,000 pictures. In most cases, he would usually shoot 2 or 3 rolls of film at one time. There weren't that many occasions.
Was he always ready with the cameras at the time?
Well, he would know. He would always have to get permission for a photo session. They would let him know usually in advance when the next contact would be, and they would let him know whether or not it was okay to bring a camera. So the pictures that we see aren't accidental. They were predetermined and where they allowed him to do it. Especially on the movie times when he would have to borrow a camera and get a tripod and come out and set his camera up. So.
My reason is asking an Air Force
Mm-hmm. Good.
Good show.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions before we get rolling? Mark?
My question is, you mentioned, not to sound like it's any prejudice or anything, but you said that earlier that the white, they were all basically white, or you mentioned that the ship designs of ships appeal to white people?
No.
Is that or misheard?
He's asking the question I was explaining earlier, how in the subconscious of most of the white people, they would have a reminiscence of this craft. Let me kind of clear that up. Historically, they're talking about the ancient Lyrians that colonized here. The ancient Lyrians were of the white race. They were a white-skinned race. And we are told by the Pleiadians that at a certain time, actually about 10,000 years back, that there was intervention in the then developing Earth human race. And there was a lot of manipulation genetics at that time by the Lyrians. Because of that, they say out of the 5 billion people that are currently alive on Earth right now, among the white race, about 2/3 of them have the Lyrian genetic in them, that they at one time or another, their spirits were Lyrian. And that was what the comment was. The Asian race, they don't know its origin. It's older, they say, than the Lyrian, and they don't know where it actually came from. The black race on our planet is from Sirius. The Sumerians came from their area. And in his notes, there are a couple other mentions of from the Barnard star. There are several people from there, and they were a white human skin race like us. But there's been a lot of interbreeding and so forth over the last years. During the time of the continent of Atlantis, there were 16 races, they mentioned, that came here and colonized at that time. And during that period, they say there were many times when there was some interbreeding going on, and this kind of created this mixture that we have today. But for those who may have the Lyrian seed in them, these designs were used by the Lyrian ships, and they felt that that would be very comfortable within the subconscious of those people. Well, we got a few more coming in. I'll give you just a little more background on that and how there was some questions about my own involvement in this. I didn't get to drink during the break. When I had gone over my first trip over, when I first got there, they had a lot of questions about me personally, why I had come over and my background, my family, and a lot of questions about my dreams and my thoughts and some of my ideas. It was like questions all afternoon. And I was happy to answer them, and I offered them a lot of, answers to the questions. And I was surprised to find out a few days later I was informed that they apparently had been kind of checking me out with the Pleiadians, and it had been determined that they had been provided with a list of 12 different people, by spiritual name, that they expected might be drawn to this material and compelled to come to see Billy or whatever, and they felt very strongly that I was on that list and that I was the 5th name on the list. So that was the reason for the questions. They felt very strongly that I had probably was a Lyrian, which means that sometime past in a previous life, the way they put it, that I was incarnated at some time on a Lyrian planet and came here during one of their colonizations. And that's when I started asking more questions about it. And historically, they were explaining that the Lyrians really are the dominant factor that seeded most of this planet. And predominantly, 2/3 of the white race stems from that Lyrian genetic. So that's where that came from. Okay, looks like we got most everybody back here. One wanted to explain a few things about time travel, which I think is kind of fun. But to do that, I'm going to have to use my board over here. Can I be heard okay? Am I talking loud enough? Is that all right? Okay. If I say something you don't quite get it, then feel free to stop me and I'll try to explain it. It's fascinating to hear about the ships and some of these concepts of time travel and the things that might be possible. But so far at our level of technology, the idea or concept of time travel is very bizarre for many of us because we just don't understand how it could be possible. So I thought what I would do, which is kind of fun, I'm going to draw you a little bit of the design and the matrix of how the universe itself was formed, which will give you a little idea, an explanation of what time is, and one method by which time travel is actually possible. Probably think this is going to be a big bullseye, huh? 5, one more. Tomorrow at the workshop, the main group of information I'm going to go over is what I would deem the spiritual aspect of this. The knowledge of self, of spirit, of life, of gods, of creation, that sort of interesting information. So for those of you who may come, I usually only do that in workshops because that type of information, which of course is private to all of us, is something if you're interested in it, you can come. Okay. What I've drawn up here, and my circles aren't too good, but I wanted to explain to you the basic idea of how the universe itself came about and what time is. Can I heard okay? Okay. This part I'll lean into it just a little bit here. On the right over here I've drawn this kind of egg shape. If you had a chance to see the universe that we live in, and by the universe I mean when we look up at the firmament and the stars and everything that we live in, we term a universe, whatever this large existence is, okay? If we could somehow get outside of it, we would see that it is egg-shaped in form. If we could take that egg and slice it in half, if we had like a universe setting here, we whacked it in half and took the top off and turned it up so we could look at it, it would look similar to what a tree trunk looks like. It would have bands within it. And that's what I was attempting to draw over here. Now I'm putting some stuff in the fifth band here because when the universe itself was originally formed, their scientists figured out it was formed by what they're calling a creation. That a creation is an idea or a force of will that has the intelligence to create a universe, a material existing, evolving thing, okay? So what has happened is when the universe itself came about, and without a lengthy explanation, it evolves into being what a tree trunk kind of looks like, where there are bands in it. These bands on the outside here, where I did not draw the squiggle, there is no material matter. Only the belt, where I drew the squiggles there, the third belt in, is the material area where all the stars and planets are. The other areas do not have any coarse matter in it. There is no time either in those areas. At a certain level of evolution of the universe itself, when that happens, there is an influence from the creational source that had the idea to make the universe that we call time. Time is actually a series of waves of impulses which animate the material matter in that particular belt. And by animate, I mean pulses of energy come into that material belt, create rotation, movement, and pulsation of matter. That's why we have a moving, expanding universe that we live in right now. It will continue to expand till a certain period of time. At that time, it will begin to contract. And I'll go into that later on. But my idea is that time was established way back when those pulses started in the material belt of the creation that we are living in. That is supposed to be a three-dimensional spiral, which is a little hard to do on a blackboard. The material belt that we live in, there is a definite pattern to how the pulses of time move through the material part and animate the matter, cause the motion of it, and those pulses move in a continuous spiral, which is multi-dimensional. How many, I don't know. It was suggested at over 20. As the pulses move through, here's what happens. I don't want to get too scientific about this, but all matter, as most of us know now, is made up of atoms, and atoms get smaller into particles. Below that, it's charges, etc., etc. But primarily, all matter is made up of a plus and minus charge at some point down there. The concept is this. Time affects every small particle and atom in the material belt of the universe that we live in. Think of it that it kind of surrounds it with like an energy force. What it does then, it causes the uniform speed of the particles as it moves through the universe. That's what creates the reality of solid things. You and I are beings, and we are all these things, but we already know if under a microscope, if we get smaller and smaller, we're molecules and then atoms, and there's space in between the particles. So at a certain level, we're not solid. Down at that level, all of our particles are surrounded by this force or pulses that we're calling time. And it is the time energy that creates the constant speed, velocity, and rotation of our matter. And that gives the illusion of solid that we live in, okay? Now here's what happens. The reason that we all keep seeing each other and everything seems smooth and consistent is because of time. Now, watch this. Let's say we built ourselves, the Pleiadians left us the plans for a craft, and we built ourselves a little UFO. We got the thing built, and on the last chapter was the explanation of how to control time, and in it, it had a little schematic in there on how we could build a device to put in the ship, which would throw our own band of energy around our ship, isolating it from the pulses of time. So the pulses of time no longer control the speed of our particles. We could control the speed of our own particles, how fast they came apart and went back together. We could isolate ourselves within the framework of the flow of the pulses of time. Once we did that and had a knob where we could control those particles, we slowed them down, what's going to happen? Our particles are going to fall behind, aren't they? We're traveling in time now. We're actually going back in time in simplest terms because we no longer then are in phase with the rest of the material world. If you consider it like this, when you put a field around a particle and you start changing the force of the field, you start throwing it out of phase. At 90 degrees, it starts wavering like it's gas-like, and you have trouble discerning it. At 180 degrees out, it disappears. It becomes invisible because it's no longer oscillating at the same speed that our visual senses can pick it up. It becomes invisible. At 360 degrees, it slips a part second out of our reality. It's no longer on the same track that you and I are on. Now, if we had the control and can control that, technically, we would accelerate that into billions of parts and we would be traveling in time. Once we understood exactly how many bit parts to each frame of second within a time pulse, we could then control exactly how many parts we skip. We could then calculate how far back it was to 1892 and go there. If we wanted to go in the future, we would have to do nothing more than accelerate the particles, moving faster down the spiral than the wave of pulses that time is creating. We're now traveling in the future. There already is a future because when the universe started and when the material belt started, all of the particles started moving, didn't they? They've been moving for a long time. You and I haven't been there yet, but they've been there. You ever held a film strip up and looked at a picture of movie film? And when we watch movies, the movie camera runs it by 24 frames a second by our eyes, and our eyes thinks it's smooth. Traveling in time is similar to that. If we could break down the particles of time and hold it up like a film strip, our ship would be like our eyes scanning across the pulses, and that's what life is. We are actually energy life forms that are attached to a track of particles that are moving, and we move along with their motion, and it creates the illusion of what life actually is. So time travel is understanding the matrix of how the universe actually works. The first form of time travel we will probably come up with is the ability to move our craft out of the material belt into the next belt, which is called the changing belt, that does not have any particles or matter in it. It has an entirely different structure than the belt we are in. The problem is once we're out there, matter can't exist there, so we have to learn two things. One, how to encase the ship within its own field, which protects and provides its own pulsation so we can exist, or we convert the ship to another form of particles that will go out into the changing belt and return with its own internal programming. And that's what Pleiadian ships do. Let's say we got our ship running and we're going to go from Earth and we're going to go visit the Pleiades. Good spot to go. At least when we get there, we'll know somebody, huh? So we get our ship and we take off. We start accelerating. Scientifically, I might as well tell you this because it could be helpful to our scientists in the future. Pleiadian ships never accelerate to high speeds within 153 million kilometers of the final orbit of a solar system. When they make these tremendous power jumps into the changing belt, it creates kind of a suction in the material belt and changes the orbits of planets sometimes and can pull things in with them. So they learned long ago to always get a certain distance away from solar systems before they do this. Without boring you with too much physics, if we had this ship, we would need two types of drive systems now to get to the Pleiades quickly. It's 450 light years away. So if our ship only goes the speed of light, it's going to take us theoretically 450 years to get there. I don't have that much time. So we need a faster way of getting there. It takes them 7 hours. Here's how they do it. 3.5 hours are spent leaving our solar system, moving out into free space, and accelerating to dramatic speeds up around the speed of light. The ship is protected by its screens so that the mass speed correlation of space cannot implode it. It will at certain speeds. We then have tremendous force coming in on the ship, which is being held back by the screens. At a certain point, when we're out in free space, we say, okay, do it. We'll hit a button or whatever in the ship. The screens around the ship are dropped. Instantaneously, the pressure of space rushes in. The pressure from that space is then used as a compression technique which facilitates converting the ship to another form of matter. They've mastered and figured out that matter is nothing more either coarse matter or fine matter, that you can take any solid object, break down its structure, convert it to particles, program it with a thought. The thought inside will send the particles where it wants to go, and it will put itself back together. That's how they get there. It actually breaks this light barrier, so to speak, goes into what scientists commonly call hyperspace. But in hyperspace, it's in particle format, goes to where it needs to go, re-enters, and takes 3 hours to fly into a Pleiadian system, hence a 7-hour flight. The actual jump is only 7 minutes on a known watch when you're outside of null time. So that's what makes it possible. The newer ships do not use this. This is the beginning theory. This is the older theory, the way that they do it. The new ones have figured out an entirely different system of transferring matter from one point to the other without the necessity of the speed or hyperspace, which gets into another explanation. But I wanted to introduce you to the idea of how our universe works and what the pulses of time are. And I can tell by the many smiling faces you kind of like that, so I hope I didn't give anybody a headache there. So. Well, as you can see, I had a great time with this and a lot of other information over there asking questions. At Billy's house in the kitchen, it's kind of like the library. Whenever you get a chance and you catch him in the kitchen, because he just kind of roams around the center there, and whenever you can corner him for a few minutes and get some questions asked, usually in the kitchen, because he's an avid coffee drinker, loves to eat sausage, And he comes in the kitchen all the time to think. And in the kitchen, there's a radio sets there, and me and the others, we were always keeping a pad of paper, because whenever you could nail him down in the kitchen, you know, you had a few questions, grab some paper real quick. I have all these scraps of paper at home, like hundreds of them. I rip it off real fast and ask a question. So drawings like this and many other things over the course of the summer, I've got all sorts of scribbled notes explaining things. So we would nail him in the kitchen and ask him a variety of things. Unfortunately, none of this information is written down anyplace, and that was why I started making the audio tapes, so I could explain it far more in detail and get it out of my own head, so, you know, before I forget it or something down the road. So before I go any farther, any other questions on that subject I might be able to answer? Yeah? What color was the spiral? I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I never asked that. I didn't consider that. I don't know. The spiral, I don't even know. It wasn't regarded as a physical thing, but as more of a map or an outlay of the order by which the pulses of time move. And I don't know that it had a form that could take a color. So, yeah.
So you say you generate a field around the ship. Inside the field, then you wouldn't experience any acceleration or movement. It'd be like you're just sitting still, while outside the ship it would be like if I was looking at outside the ship, outside the field, it would act like it had no mass. So it would,
Yeah, that's correct. The question was about if you're inside the ship, would you feel anything like movement or whatever? No, you don't. It makes its own gravitational field. So inside of the ship, you'll notice on a lot of Billy's pictures, sometimes it looks like it's hanging sideways or moving. And if you watch his movie film, even when it's going slow, it just kind of flops around like it's in water or something. Billy says inside of the ship you feel nothing. You can't even tell when you've left the ground. It's just like staying at home. The only difference is, now you rub your feet on the carpet sometime and you get a little ripple through your body, you know, when you hit the carpet. He says when you make those jumps, they were explaining to him how it worked, and he says they explained to him, well, that's your body coming back together when it's rearranged. And he commented, I don't think I like the idea of my particles being flung through the universe. Maybe is there some other way we could get there? But they says, no, that's just the way it is. That led to, at the time when he was allowed to go with them, they have a very large ship, which is termed like a great spacer. It's very large. And on that particular trip, he had more questions, because the more times he would be in a ship when they would make these jumps, every time there was a jump, he would concentrate trying to figure out what was going on in his body and see if he could get a feeling or an impulse from it. And he would start getting a sensation that he couldn't quite explain, but it felt good, and he couldn't quite figure out what it was. When he was on the Great Spacer, they began to provide an answer. It says, even though to our material self and our material conscious it seems instant, 7 minutes have actually gone by in what's called null time. That there is actually, even in the changing belt, there is time, but it moves at a completely different rate. It's far faster, apparently, than what we can understand, so it seems instantaneous. And they said what's happening is when you are in that brief little 7-minute span there, but your body doesn't know it's gone because there's no body at the moment. You're just programmed particles. That once you are a fine matter being again, or which in effect would be just a spiritual energy force, you are immediately then aware your material body is absent, and your spiritual self is immediately aware again of eternity, or whatever you would want to call creation. And that's what he was feeling at each jump. There was the sudden realization and exhilaration of that little fraction of a second when he was in contact with the creational force of the universe. So he had a lot of questions about that, and they allowed him, this is an amazing concept, they allowed him on one of the big ships to have remembrance of the 7 minutes so it could be played back. And they said it's common as people on their world are learning about creation and universe and the forces of life and so forth, that they're taken out on the big ships and they go through a process of sitting kind of in a chair with some devices that read your aura and all of your thoughts and so forth. And when the jump happens, you have full awareness that your particles then record the whole 7 minutes while it's happening, and it can actually be played back in thought form so you can experience it. So Billy says, I got to try this. Let's do that. We would all try it too, right? Well, he tried it, and in his notes there's this stream of consciousness of words, exhilaration, and excitement, while suddenly his spiritual self, which is all there is at that point, is feeling this rush and this attachment to the creational force. And he's going kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And he rambles on and on and on and gets more and more excited. And when they came back, he's like rambling in the chair and didn't want him to take the headpiece off, and he's kind of throwing his arms up, and they had to kind of, wake up, Billy, it's over. We understand how nice it is in there, but you can't stay in there. It only just like that. So he's not been the same since then, and probably none of us would be. For most of us, it's a supposition or a belief that there is some sort of creational force, but we don't know exactly what it is because we haven't experienced to any extent like that. So should the opportunity arise in something like that, you might want to try it. I certainly would. You would get a full 7-minute awareness then of what it was like to be a spiritual being in touch with the creational force that made the universe. So pretty exciting stuff. I have a tape, by the way, where that's explained for about 2.5 hours in detail. And it's also in this tape set, because that to me was one of the more fascinating areas to get into that. As a matter of fact, if you don't mind, if you want to bear with me, I can show you a few things about the material brain, the spiritual self, and how particles move from one part of your brain to the other and actually create what spiritual development is. So, if I go too far, just stop and say I give up. Okay? I know some of you probably can't read that from all the way back, but my little diagram here is to explain a little bit about what a life form actually is. The purpose of our life is to experience a series of material existences that gather information with our physical senses. As logic and wisdom is formed, your spiritual self listens to it all the time. And as you gain wisdom, which is correct in format in relation to the creation, it is added to the spirit, and that's what spiritual growth is. And here's a little bit how it works. Over here on your material self, when you are born, of course, you've come out of creation or wherever it is that you concern yourself coming from, you begin to create a material body. At that point, you develop senses, don't you? You can see, touch, smell, so forth. You create the equipment to sense the world around you, okay? So that's our 5 sensors: sight, feel, touch, smell, hearing, so forth. We gather information now. Here's what happens. As you're listening to me, gathering any information from the moment that you come into the life, here's what happens. Your senses come to life. You start perceiving the world around you. That's with your conscious mind. That's what the big C means there. You have a conscious mind that you're using right now. All the time that your conscious mind is on, you also have a subconscious mind which is open for business all the time. Your subconscious mind down here, think of that as the computer. That's your actual engine that really runs your mind. That's where all of your memories are, your thought patterns and feelings and attitudes about stuff. As you're listening to all my information, here's what's happening. Very quickly, all the information is coming in your ears. It dashes over to this sensor or filter in the middle, because the sensor in the middle will stop frivolous, erroneous thoughts and block them off. Any thought that you put any kind of concentration into immediately runs to the subconscious to see if you have any data on that. You immediately experience a rapid feeling of either sympathy or antipathy, whatever it is. Do you have anything on that? Do you have a feeling about it? And all of that feeling is all of the wisdom experience that you've accumulated in the material lifetime. It's only material stuff. It's only knowledge that you've accumulated so far during your lifetime. Once you have heard the information, as soon as your subconscious gets it, it's dashed back up to the conscious mind and you get a quick reply. And it's really fast. You're doing it millions of times a second as you're listening to information. That's the mechanics of how your brain actually works. Once it goes back to the conscious mind, you react. You say another word, you think, or whatever it is, because you're running, your senses all of the time. Then something kind of interesting happens. You collect a lot of information, a lot of thoughts and ideas about things, and as you concentrate on a thought, every time you go back to a thought and reinforce it, it becomes stronger. Once it's reinforced to a certain extent, it becomes a will or a force within you. It's an idea then that you understand. At that point, it comes down and it's housed in the psyche. The psyche is where all of your feelings and thoughts and your view of the world, your persona, who you collectively are as a feeling, thinking individual. It's affected there. You've now added something to your personal self, to your psyche, by virtue of new information and new experiences. Now here's what happens. All the time you're going through this process, all the time that you're materially alive, your spiritual side over here, your spiritual subconscious is listening to everything, your great conclusions, your great logic that you're coming up with all of the time, okay? But it has an advantage over your material mind. Your material mind doesn't have anybody to consult to see whether or not you're on target or not. You have only yourself to figure it out and see whether or not it's right by trial and error in what you think of things as you go through your life. Your spiritual self has the advantage that a bit part of it is actually always connected to the creational source. And that's what Billy was sensing when he was in eternity for those 7 minutes, okay? What it does, it listens to all of our great conclusions and great ideas that we come up with. Once an idea becomes part of us, where it's life-changing, where it becomes part of your cumulative self, it's transferred from the subconscious of the material to the subconscious over on the other side in your spiritual self. Your spiritual subconscious is where all of the wisdom of the previous lives resides. It is in there all of the time. Unfortunately, we are not trained in our world how to find it, how to use it, and how to sense it. But it's there. It comes to us all the time, usually as a hunch. A little voice, you know, how many times have you done something, you say, I knew better, I shouldn't have done that. Well, it's the little feeling inside of it because it's always trying to, it's like, if you want my advice, you know, I'm in here. If you're willing to pay attention, it does that. After you accumulate things and your spiritual subconscious over here gets some information, I mentioned it has an advantage on what to accept. This little area down over here is called a Gemüt. It was the German word which means sensor or feeler. It has the ability to, you might say, get some information from creation. It has the ability that it's always connected. There's like this silver thread concept that people talk about sometimes. It's your connecting device to the universal knowledge. And most people have no idea that it exists. But you have the ability to consult it. Plus, one other thing which is very valuable that you're going to recognize this. Over on your material side, on your material conscious mind, you have something that the Pleiadians call a we form, and it's a sense that you're not used to using. The same thing exists on the spiritual side. There's another we form, and they call them we forms because it's a sense where it's kind of like an open party line where your subconscious is connected to other subconsciouses. On the material side, it's short range. It's confined to a planet. So your material subconscious, the material we form over here is always transmitting and receiving information at the subconscious level, and everything picks it up. Even plants and animals pick it up and are affected by it. The spiritual subconscious, the we form on this side, is long range and has the ability to reach almost anywhere in the universe, and it also has the ability, once it's understood, through a language of symbols, to connect to higher life forms. This is where if you hear about people who telepathically receive information psychically from the Akashic record, or if any of you have ever seen Luis Gasparetto, the spirit drawer, who draws these great paintings by Van Gogh and everybody else, and they're so realistic nobody can understand it, that's how it's possible. That's also what auto-writing is. Billy can sit down at the table and I can say to him, Da Vinci, and he will just take about 20 seconds and he starts auto-writing and scribbling like Da Vinci. I says, what are you doing? He says, that's not Da Vinci. What that is that he has developed that spiritual we form to the point he immediately knows the symbols, then allow him to tap into the thoughts of Da Vinci when he was alive because he knows where they're stored. We have something called an Akashic record, which is like, there's an aura around a body. There's an Akashic record, which is a field of energy around a planet that stores all the thoughts of the people. They don't dissipate. There's also an aura or Akashic record around a galaxy, and there's one for the universe. It's materially not possible for you to get into it. It's required that you understand the language of symbol that opens up ideas and transmits them. The material mind has no access to it. So, what is spiritual growth, and what are you doing as you're living through a material life? You are a spiritual being on a material quest, gathering information to feed logic and knowledge to your spirit. Once you pass over, the material self dissipates, we know that, but what happens beyond? You don't go anywhere. The spiritual self stays on the planet where it dies. It doesn't go anyplace. A few interesting facts. It's considered a cogitation or sleep period by the Pleiadians. Even when you move into that side, you don't lose awareness of self. It's a slow process where that eventually fades out. But on the other side over there, as a spiritual self, you are a collection of all you have been before you. So the material concerns evaporate rather quickly, and you move into a sleep-like or cogitation state where you are then, like you do at night, kind of working out all the thoughts that were left over from the material life. A few interesting points for you to dwell on. The average turnaround time before coming back into material existence is 152 years on the average. The longer you live, the more you contribute to the spirit, the longer it takes for you to come back. The shorter you live, the less you learn, the faster you come back. You have no say-so in it. It's part of the creational engine, so to speak, that balances things out. If someone dies early from an accident, car wreck, or whatever, has a short life, does not have the ability to complete any cycles of thoughts or learning, it's provided that they come back faster in order to complete a cycle to keep in step with all of the others. It's part of the natural laws of how the creation itself works. A couple other interesting things you might be interested in, then I'll get off of this. The spirit makes the decision to come into a body the third week from conception. That's the level of morality on a Pleiadian world about what we would consider abortion. At that point, they know the spirit is in. They can even detect who it is in the previous lifetimes that it's come in from, so they can help it as it grows. Okay. Any questions on that before I move on to something else? Okay.
I have one question.
Yeah, Rod?
I was just on the time, when you're in spiritual transform, do you know time? Like
No.
150 years?
No, there's no, he asks us, do you experience time when you're on the fine matter world, they call it, or they sometimes refer to it as the other side. No, there isn't. There's no awareness of time, because time are pulses that only affect coarse matter. Once you are fine matter existence again, the pulses don't affect it. Over here?
You call it the fine matter universe, so that implies that it is still made of matter. Are there, and you showed several rings, are there other universes higher that are made purely of spirit?
Yeah, he's asking if there are other universes made purely of spirit because I referred to fine matter. Fine matter actually is a matter. It's their word that Billy chose to express what this fluffy matter state is, more like what a thought is, because it actually has mass, but we just can't detect it. I didn't elaborate on the universes because I kind of wanted to get to the time sort of concept, but yeah, I'll show you. The universe that we are living in, which is created by this creational force they're talking about, ours, the one that we're in, will have a lifespan of 311 trillion and 40 billion years. Universes go through cycles of evolution and establish basically the rules of 7, which dictate all life forms throughout nature and through us. It dictates certain policies. Our universe will expand and contract and pull back together. It will then go through a sleep state of equal time, and then it will expand and contract again, and it increases in size and length each time that it does it. It will go through a cycle of that 7 times, they tell us. They call it a great time. That is a complete learning cycle, they view it, for a universe, for a creation. At that time, it transforms itself into another kind of universe that they call an Ur universe. Ur universes don't have the material belt. They go through periods of evolution, but you can think of them as kind of like mothers because they create other universes. They then go through 7 cycles of creating beginning universes and become what they call a central universe, and that is as far as their science has ever stretched out. They hypothesize that there are probably 7 levels to it, but they have no awareness really beyond the second. They don't even know anything about the central universe. This knowledge, much of it, has come not only from their searches, but from higher life forms which no longer exist in the physical body. Those which are so close to the creation itself that they begin to have their own truth about how the universe works, They take advice from these beings, and that's where much of this information came from. Back in the back.
What have you learned concerning the immediate future aspects of the planet in the next 20 years, first evolution of the planet, next 500 years, 1,000 years, where we are headed and going, and our relationship with our space brothers?
Okay, the question, I think everybody heard it, but for the tape, the question was prophetically, where are we moving towards as a race, say, over the next 500 years, spiritually and as a race? Good question. Billy has a little book called The Prophecy. The good news is that even asking that inside of a ship once, he was allowed to see a future Earth, roughly 500 years in the future, and we did survive. There were cities both on Earth and on the moon. We had flight travel, and we were moving out into the universe ourselves. So we did make it. As far as the prophecies through the next 20 years, they're very difficult. The prophecy book was written in 75, and for the most part, the first years up through 88, which have already happened, which was a series of assassinations, political problems, and so forth, have all come true and are in there. The part you're most interested in, I'm sure, is probably what's happening next. There are a few pages devoted to that. Of most interest is the talk mostly about natural disasters, that as we are already beginning to notice that there's an increase with the problems with the Earth itself. There are hurricanes to be expected on the eastern coast of the United States to the magnitude that several cities will be wiped out with a possible loss of 20 to 30 million people instantly through massive hurricanes, much greater than we've experienced so far. Just this past year, we've already experienced a couple of hurricanes that were very deadly in the southern coast, so it looks like they're actually beginning. There will be, it says, in the land or the area of the Native American Indian is not spared from the earthquakes and the problems. There is major loss of life from disease, which unfortunately, there is so much loss of life that the bodies laying on the ground from wars and disease create new bacteria which we have no awareness of yet, and creates new diseases which cause major loss of life. So there's a pretty cheery thought there. The prophecies, you know, I try to make a little light of them because, for one thing, they are just projections of the future. They are more or less like warnings. There are several ways to look at the future. If you're a prophetic person, a person of vision and so forth, your visions can be very accurate because the human spiritual self actually does have the ability to move forward in time somewhat. If you are a person given to numerology or Kabbalistic numerology and so forth to figure things out, whatever you come to, of course, usually is based on ratios or percentage, like a probability of something happening. Billy told me a story which might kind of sum it up once. He says if we could borrow a Pleiadian ship and all of us got in it and say jumped ahead 100 years to see what was going on, and we get out and we walk around and whatever, and we come back and we're all talking about what a great time we had and wow, how things had changed, and did you see that, and did you see that? We get back and suddenly someone in the group says, oh, I left my purse or whatever back there, you know, we got to go back and get it. If we went back to the same spot just minutes later to get it, things would look a little different. There would be a slight change. The future is never fixed because of the element of free will. Nature doesn't change the same way because it does not have free will. The process of growth of nature works differently than the human spirit does. So for us to return there, free will will have come into play for 100 years, even though we wouldn't live out the 100 years, and things would be slightly different. The lesson was that free will actually controls things. You can turn a thought to an idea and concentrate it on it. Your subconscious mind, all of the time that we are alive, develops your thought thinking and forms your concentration. If all of us, for instance, in the room right now, if we had a meter over here, we measured our subconscious mind power, if all of us started concentrating on the same thought, we'd see the meter start rising as we focused on it. As we concentrated harder and got excited because we're actually doing it, we would keep concentrating. At a certain point, things could start happening. If we were strong enough, we could actually manifest that thought probably into matter or to action of some sort. They do that, and they impress upon Billy all the time how we need to learn these things to start taking control, not only of our immediate future, but of our future as a society. They tell us that beginning in 1937, there is an 800-year window of opportunity open for us to have the opportunity to convert this to a planet of peace instead of one of illogical thinking, was how they expressed it. that right now, when they scan our subconscious, what they see is that we think improperly. That's their way of expressing it. We come to poor conclusions because we're not trained properly about life. We think illogically because we're misinformed about what a life really is and what its really purpose is. They don't look at it like a fault, they just look at it like they're uneducated. They don't know what this really is. Interesting story on that that'll give you a little insight into the subconscious.